Welcome to Tsurekano, the anime with so many flashbacks that I wrote a song about it.
Alright, I get it!
Welcome back to yet another anime video here today, fellas. We've got two separate series that I want to be covering, one of which is shorter than the other. However, we're actually going to cover the shorter series first, because I have a lot more to say about Tsurekano, also known as My Stepmother's Daughter is My Ex. Yeah, we'll get into the title, don't worry. After that, we're going to be talking about the pet girl of Sakura Hall, or Sakarasou, whichever title you want to go by, which was definitely the better of the two series. However, I have a little bit less to say about it, because usually if I'm not complaining, I'm not talking all that much. So, without further ado, we're just going to jump straight into this, starting with Tsurekano. So, I'm going to be following a formula similar to my Spy X Family review, where we cover individual episodes, rather than my Arimo and Aramanga Sensei review, where we more so focused on the characters and individual details. So, episode 1 is pretty faithful to the title, being the main character, Mizuto, is essentially trying to adapt to the new situation that he's been put in, which is that for a few months now, I believe it's been a few months already, at the start of the first episode, he now has a new stepsister, being Yume, who is his ex-girlfriend. This is, of course, a bad situation to be in, and it plays out in a very entertaining manner. It is very fun to watch, and their little bickering back and forth definitely puts a new lens on the typical romance anime that you see. So, rather than having one character, or even both characters, be tsunderes, instead, they're more so just under circumstances that make them hostile to one another. They're not like that personality-wise, I would say. Yume, you could argue, is a tsundere. However, I think her personality is a little bit more complex than that, but we're moving on. Episode 2 follows a similar pattern, except it shows these two starting to make friends as they start off their typical days in high school. This is, of course, yet another high school anime. On a side note, the pet girl of Sakura Hall, it technically takes place in high school as well. However, it doesn't follow the exact same pattern. It's not a regular school, first of all, and second of all, schooling isn't the main focus of it, so you can kind of ignore that. In this show, it is yet another high school anime, which is the vast majority of shows. However, fortunately, it isn't all of them. Anyways, episode 2 is mostly Mizuto. He runs into a new fellow named Kawanami, and then Yume runs into Minami. Now, Minami is probably my favorite character in this entire series. Why? Well, my favorite characters are usually the goofy, wild, crazy characters, and she is that for this show. She is the, not comic relief, all characters in this show are pretty funny, but she's definitely the most goofy and off-the-walls individual in the show. She is very similar to the next show's Misaki, who is absolutely out of her mind, but we'll get to that. Kawanami is basically just the best friend character for Mizuto, except he is very laid back and he's a fun guy to watch. Honestly, if they focused on the side characters in this show, it would be much more entertaining. However, the focus on the main characters, it starts off really good, but you'll kind of see how that diminishes over time. Episode 3 is not a filler episode, but it's kind of just more goofy antics between the two. Now, the first 3 episodes of this show are very good with their pacing. The pacing makes it feel like every episode matters, every episode has a substantial impact, and you feel like you're watching a whole season's worth of information. Not because it is boring, but because everything feels like it has a place. Everything matters, and it's moving all at the same time in a way to where you're getting as much info about the characters as possible while not showing a million different things. It doesn't drag its feet like To Love Ruth. So you're not wasting your time, but it's a lot like 3D Kanojo in that sense. 3D Kanojo starts out faster than any anime ever, period. I don't think it's even possible to rush the beginning of a show as fast as 3D Kanojo did. Now, of course, 3D Kanojo is a really good anime, so that's why it's able to get away with it. But the first 2 episodes are like just an Amtrak train breezing through the walls. It is absolutely insane how fast it moves. compared to this show, which has a similar speed, but it isn't completely rushed and all over the place. There is at least a structure to moving piece by piece by piece. However, that structure starts to go off the rails a little bit next episode. Next episode, of course, being episode 4. Now, this is I would say the first time they have a significant flashback in this show. Flashbacks are this show's biggest problem, obviously. I kind of hinted at that earlier. We're going to get more so into that. However, the episode doesn't lean that heavily into flashbacks. I think there's only 1 or 2. And the main focus of the episode is they basically create this little plan to stop Minami. Minami has this weird obsessive personality, and because Yume is her best friend, which, by the way, they met like a few days prior, but it's whatever. So, she's friends with Yume. She wants to marry Mizuto so that she can be the sister-in-law of Yume. Anyways, they conjure up this plan, basically, to shatter that dream by having Mizuto go on a date with Yume, who is his stepsister. But things don't entirely go according to plan because Yume starts to have her feelings from the past boil back to the surface. Because remember, they used to go out with each other. That is, of course, the core of this show, being that Yume and Mizuto still have feelings for each other, even though they are exes. Which, by the way, they were exes from middle school. So they dated in middle school. Now, let me go on a little side thing real quick. I know that animes are obviously based in Japan, and in Japan, middle school works different than in the United States. So, middle school ends about when freshman year of high school takes place in the United States. So they're like 14 years old, whatever. Anyways, regardless of that fact, I cannot fathom for the life of me how you can date in middle school and still be dwelling on something that happened in middle school. Right? I would probably say that it's a big deal starting junior year of high school and onward in terms of relationships. Anything before that, and it's practically little kids playing on a playground. That's at least my opinion of it, but I don't know. Maybe I'm a fool, maybe there are exceptions, whatever. But they dwell way too much on something that happened in middle school. And even though their personalities are completely different from middle school, they still have that focus and all of that still stuck in their head, which includes their feelings, but it also includes lots of baggage. And we'll get into the baggage starting with episode 6. But for now, we have the best episode in this show, which is also considered one of the top-rated episodes on IMDb. Just a little fun fact. Episode 5. Now, episode 5 is pretty much the fun episode. They ditch most of the flashbacks and dwelling on past and whatever else, and this is mostly just everybody kind of goofing off. So the beginning of the episode is Mother's Day, and I want to say Yume's mother is definitely, I don't know why, I just really like her character. She's not on screen a whole lot, but whenever she is on screen, it's just a lot of fun, and she's a very silly character. Her dynamic with Mizuto's father is pretty nice as well. They're kind of like the ideal married couple for the context of anime. It might be in a funny kind of way. It's like a parasocial attachment to people's parents in fiction. I have watched so many anime where they don't have parents at home, or the single parent at home, that when there's two parents at home, it's like you get attached to those people for them. It's weird. The other part of this episode are Kawanami and Minami. Basically, they live next door, and Yume goes with Minami, and Kawanami has Mizuto over in his house. So they're next door, and they start messing around. They're like reading their diaries out loud just to mess with each other, things like that. This is a very laid-back episode. It doesn't have the same problems as other episodes in this show, and they kind of step away from the seriousness a lot with this one. They focus more so on just kind of small character growth, some steps forward, and they especially, the most important part of this is they show progression with the side characters. So the side characters get a lot more development. More so, you see their perspectives, you see their personalities, and you at least get more attached to them. This is important because this show doesn't have a lot of side characters, right? This is not To Love Ru or Loving Yamada at level 999. This is a show with, like 6 main characters? I say main as in you have the 2 main characters and then you have 4 side characters that are important. No, it's 3 side characters that are important. So it's even less than you would expect. Moving on to episode 6. So episode 6 is where the relationship drama starts to take a turn because, sure enough, there's another character, and the character is a romantic rival for Yume because they are close to Mizuto. This is, of course, Higashira. Asana's her first name. Asana is a pretty chill character. She doesn't really have any sort of romantic attraction, at least at first, towards Mizuto, which makes things docile in the beginning, but of course things will escalate over the course of the next few episodes. Now, episode 6 is what I call the beginning of the end in context of this show. Why do I say that? Well, this is where the flashbacks begin. And the flashbacks in this episode, if I had to count how many there were, I would have absolutely no clue how many flashbacks there are in this show in total. I think next episode has the most, but this episode I think has like 3 or 4, something like that. I know the very start of the episode has a flashback right after the intro rolls, and then there's one later on, and there might be another one as well. Anyways, this is basically Yume getting jealous of Higashira, and then side characters are once again goofing off around each other. There's also a whole thing where they compete over test scores or something, but that's not really that big of a deal, so we're going to ignore it. Episode 7 is Yume and Minami pressuring Higashira into basically confessing to Mizuto. Now, you might say, well, isn't this contradictory? Because if Yume's in love with Mizuto, then wouldn't she not want her rival to win? Well, yes, but also she is trying to convince herself that she's not still in love with Mizuto, because remember that thing that they love to remind you about, that they were dating in the past? Yeah, they're still dwelling on that. Now, this episode has so many flashbacks, it's actually inconceivable, but don't worry, next episode somehow has more flashbacks. Now, you might be wondering how it is that of all the things in this show, I dwell specifically on the flashbacks. Well, because they love to dwell on the flashbacks. That is probably the one thing I can remember from this show, is all of the flashbacks. Now, the biggest issue with this, of course, is whenever you're making a show, the last thing you want somebody who watched the show to remember is a specific singular thing. This is because if you have all of these events taking place, you should be remembering the different events that are occurring. For example, when I watch 100 Girlfriends, I can remember every single individual girlfriend's intro backstory. Like, whenever they were first introduced, what that episode was about, I can remember what it was about. But in this show, I can't remember individual events even when I'm looking at the episode and its description. So of course this is a big problem, because this shows that the flashbacks are so frequent, they overshadow the rest of the show. Now, I do want to say that this show has a lot of funny stuff within it, but it is really hard to explain what is good about the show because it's not very surface level. Everything in this show is extremely complex and dynamic, and the dialogue is not super memorable. It's funny, and it's entertaining, but it isn't memorable. So like Quintessential Quintuplets, I have a vivid understanding of what they are doing in many of the episodes, or especially Kaguya-sama Love is War. I can remember whole scenes that are taking place because they're so memorable and they're very funny. But in this show, you have to watch it to know what I'm talking about, or to understand why I think the show is good. But at the same time, the flashbacks are, it's like My Hero Academia with how many flashbacks there are. It is insane. So we're moving on to number 8, episode 8. So episode 8 is basically the typical staple episode where they're going to a clothes store to get clothing for one of the characters. Originally, they're getting clothes for Higashira. However, Higashira is not really that focused on making Mizuto attracted to her. Her head isn't in the game because she's not really all that invested in making him specifically a boyfriend. She just wants to be friends with him, which also, another key detail in this show is that Higashira is arguably a significantly better option for Mizuto to marry or to be in love with or whatever, because she's very much a simple kind of person. She doesn't have any baggage with her. She's not a bad person. She doesn't really even have any negative qualities. And the biggest key difference is that she's already Mizuto's friend, or basically his best friend. So that is, of course, if you ask most people who are in what you would call a successful marriage, their wife or their spouse is their best friend. and they were best friends before they got married. So they didn't date with the objective of getting married, they would just date because it's a step up from being friends. So even if you go to the context of the manga, which I'll talk a little bit about that after, the light novel I mean, Higashira ends up getting rejected not only in the anime but also the light novel later on, and instead of getting angry or anything like that, she kind of just accepts it and goes, oh, okay, we can still be friends, right? And then Mizuto allows them to still be friends because, you know, they don't have any problems with each other, and then they just remain friends, and things are happy, and nothing really changes on that end. And I think that is definitely something better to see than them freaking out or losing it. But on this end of things, it's of course much more relaxed, and the stakes are quite a bit lower. Speaking of low stakes, we're moving on to Episode 9. Episode 9 is, well, holy flashback, dude. The entire episode, nothing but flashbacks. I'm basically skipping over this episode because the entire thing is just talking about how they were and what happened and how they messed up their relationship before. Long story short, they had horrible communication skills and they both got jealous of each other because that's real mature. And then after that, everything kind of just collapsed and went the wrong way, and then they ended up step-siblings in a twist of very entertaining irony. Episode 10 is some more clothes shopping and them acting awkward at home, and that's pretty much it. Episode 11 is Mizuto and Yume going to see their new family, Mizuto already had that side of his family. Yume, it is her new extended family. They're going out to the countryside to see them. They learn a lot about each other, and it is in this episode that Yume finally realizes more about Mizuto. So Mizuto grew up without a mother, and he also grew up in kind of this state of derealization, so nothing to him in the world felt real. Everything felt like he was just this spectator looking on, and books and fiction felt a lot more like real life to him, since literature is a big central topic within this anime. Then in episode 12, they kind of reignite their romance a little bit, Yume and Mizuto, and it is here that it's sort of set up to continue. Now, of course, the anime isn't continuing anytime soon, which is pretty upsetting, but the light novel extends from this, and that's where the drama gets a little bit worse, but this is kind of the stepping stone for the actual romance, is the final episode of the show. So, that's all I have to say about Tsurekano. What are my thoughts on it? Well, this show was really good. However, the flashbacks, especially in the middle part of the show, took the pacing from perfect to absolutely awful. And it happened very abruptly, very quickly. Honestly, I didn't even realize one of my biggest pet peeves in all of fiction until I watched this show, which kind of gave me that realization and made me reflect on all these other things that I had watched in the past, and made me realize that dwelling on the past is one of my least favorite tropes in all of fiction. Dwelling on the past is just so frustrating, so annoying, and having all these flashbacks, I mean, everybody knows who watches anime that flashbacks are a waste of your time. They almost always are. And recaps are a very similar kind of evil. It's that constant dwelling on a single scene or on a single thing, especially something that doesn't really have all that much importance, that bothers me a lot. And I know that's the main point of this show, is dwelling on their previous relationship and where things went wrong and being able to forgive each other for that. But at the same time, something that happened in middle school, it should not be where all of your thoughts flash back to, you know? I mean, I know they're young, but they're also not that young. There are so many other things that are going on in their lives or that have gone on that it's time to move on from that and look forward to new things. They've already shown that they themselves are very different from how they were in the past. Therefore, it's like dealing with different people. So the only thing remaining is your fear of not being able to move on, and you have to get over that fear. And maybe it's easier said than done, but as an audience, it can get a little frustrating. Anyways, fellas, we are moving on.
This is the best sign ever! I just my pants!
The next show I watched was The Pet Girl of Sakura Hall. Now, this show is peak fiction. Oh, baby, this show is good. Now, of course, this is a heavy contrast from Tsurekano. Tsurekano, I would give it a solid 9 out of 10, which I think is being pretty generous given all the horrible flashbacks and such. But while I was watching the show, I had a good time. Now, that is, of course, in contrast to the pet girl of Sakura Hall. I'm just going to tell you guys right now, I'm not even going to wait till the end, this is a 10 out of 10 show. Oh god, it's a 10 out of 10 show. Now, for context, the guy who not made the show itself, but made this anime is the exact same person who created Rascal Does Not Dream. So, going into this, I damn well knew this was going to be a good show to watch. However, what I did not expect was for it to be arguably better than Rascal Does Not Dream. Now, of course, if you look at the light novel, so everything that happens after the anime takes place, it's a fiasco. It gets pretty bad, and some stuff happens that we're going to pretend like the light novel and manga and whatever doesn't even exist, and we're just going to focus on the animes. I mean, it's 24 episodes long, which, if you look at romance animes, that's basically the equivalent of 2 seasons worth of content. So, it ending after that, and by the way, with the way that it ends, it can absolutely end that way, because it is a satisfying ending. It goes out with a bang, that's for sure. So anyways, we have the main character of this show, Sarada Kanda, and he is, well, okay, he's kind of your typical romance anime main character, mediocre, not that great at anything. However, this guy is especially interesting because of the theme of this show. The main theme of this show is kind of mediocrity. So, what I mean by that is you have people in the show that are extremely talented. So, like, Sheena, who is one of the other main characters, is basically your typical savant. She is masterful when it comes to art. However, she is really awful at doing any basic function. So, all common sense pretty much flies out the window, and she's dependent on other people to take care of her. However, her paintings, her manga, her drawings, all of that is phenomenal. It is off the page. And then you have another character as well, Nanami, who equally embodies the sense of mediocrity. So the idea of this show is that people who work extremely hard may not always be able to live up to or even reach the level of somebody who is just naturally talented by default. So it is kind of effort versus talent and how that looks. So a lot of people can relate to this show because it is so widespread in the world. Everything is so much about talent, but also effort is a big deal. So in some fields, effort is more important than talent, and in other cases, talent is more important than effort. So it kind of shows that people who are good at something, maybe not great, but good at things, they can put in tons of effort and then fail anyways just because somebody else by default is better than them. And that creates a very sad environment for the show, which is also more impactful because it is in such great contrast to the silly and ridiculous environment that this show creates. So Sakura Hall is basically not for delinquents, but for kids that break the rules of this art school. And instead of putting them in the normal dormitories, they put them in Sakura Hall, which is kind of run down, filthy, that kind of thing. But the people who are at Sakura Hall, best characters of all time. And everyone together, you can definitely feel the familial sense that everybody gets when they're around each other. And on a side note, the side character romances in the show, I say this a lot, and I'll say it again, side characters I feel like often have better romances than the main characters in anime, at least in most shows, and this show is no exception of that at all. Ryusaki and Rita, just those two alone make the entire show. And I think it's funny, Rita is the embodiment of the character that I see in a few different anime that just makes the entire show, and you know they're not supposed to. You know that they're not the focus of the show, and you could argue they're more of a background character than a side character just because of how rarely they appear. I mean, Rita is a side character, but she's also not super important. She's important for a few episodes. She is the old friend of Sheena back in England, which, by the way, we have another British anime character. And just like her, this character is also my favorite character in this show. Why? I have no idea. She's just fun when she's on screen. Everything gets funnier, better, and more exciting whenever they're on screen. And Ryusaki's interactions with her just brighten up the day. And that's without even considering Misaki. Misaki and Jean are the peak side characters in this show. Misaki is like, she's pretty much as crazy as Trevor Phillips and the Joker. That's the only two characters that I can think of that can match her level of insanity. She is completely out of her mind, but oh my gosh, she's funny to watch. And the final thing that I want to bring up is the finale for this show is probably, and I'm not exaggerating, it might be the best finale I've ever seen in anime history, period. I have never seen in any romance anime a conclusion that was such a just powerful, awesome, hell yes moment for the main characters. Their whole graduation ceremony, them rigging the whole thing to where they were able to save Sakura Hall because the school board wanted to tear down Sakura Hall, basically for little reason. I'm not going to go into their reasoning for it. And they tried to petition for it not to be torn down, but they failed to petition and get enough signatures. They ended up making it to where on graduation day, Misaki would give a speech, and it would inspire everybody to keep Sakura Hall up because, you know, public opinion would rise against the school board. And it was basically like the good ending, or one of the good endings, I should say, for Detroit Become Human. The androids start singing, and then all the military troops stand down. That's pretty much what this was. Words cannot describe the level of satisfaction that I had for the final episode of this show. And, of course, if I had to recommend an anime for romance, it would be this show. Now, what happens after the anime? Some weird stuff. It basically turns into a harem anime, and then some other stuff goes down, and some of the side characters, like Jean and Misaki, you don't see again. All that kind of weird stuff. So, the anime is basically the conclusion to this show. And what a conclusion it was. Oh boy. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for today, fellas. I would give this anime, The Pet Girl of Sakura Hall, or Sakarasou, as the title would have it, 10 out of 10. Easy 10 out of 10. For Tsurekano, I would give it a 9 out of 10, maybe an 8 out of 10, but I'll be generous with it and say 9. And that'll be all for this time. Next show I'm going to be watching will probably be School Live. However, I also want to rewatch Origairu because I'm going to make an entire video talking about Origairu, and is it as bad as I remember? Is it better? That'll be a whole thing. If you guys enjoyed, please leave a like, a comment, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a fantastic day and a fantastic life. Goodbye, everyone.
I just